World War II. The deadliest conflict in human history. Over 70 million lives lost. But among those who survived the battlefields, millions faced a different kind of warfare. One fought not with bullets and bombs, but with hunger, cold, and the slow erosion of human dignity. Between 1939 and 1945, more than 140,000 Allied prisoners of war were held in German camps. Over 27,000 Americans alone were captured and imprisoned. In the Pacific, tens of thousands more fell into Japanese hands. And across Eastern Europe, Soviet POWs died by the millions. This is their story. A story of unimaginable cruelty and unexpected humanity. Of men who refused to be broken, even when everything was taken from them. For most prisoners of war, the nightmare began the moment they raised their hands in surrender. The Geneva Convention of 1929 established clear rules for the treatment of POWs: adequate food, shelter, medical care, and protection from violence. But in the chaos of total war, these rules would be honored more in the breach than the observance. In Europe, captured Allied soldiers were typically processed through interrogation centers before being sent to permanent camps. The Germans operated different types of facilities: stalags for enlisted men, offlags for officers. Conditions varied widely, but one thing remained constant: the shock of transition from soldier to prisoner. I remember the first night in the camp. We were packed into wooden barracks, maybe 200 men where there should have been 50. The smell was overwhelming: unwashed bodies, the latrine trenches. I thought, how am I going to survive even a week of this? I didn't know I'd be there for 3 years. German POW camps, while harsh, generally followed international law, at least for Western Allied prisoners. The same could not be said for Soviet POWs. Of the nearly 5.7 million Soviet soldiers captured by the Germans, over 3.3 million died in captivity, a death rate of nearly 60%. Nazi ideology viewed Slavic peoples as subhuman. Soviet prisoners were deliberately starved, worked to death, or executed. They were denied even the basic protections afforded to other prisoners. In the Pacific, the situation was equally dire, but for different reasons. Japanese military culture viewed surrender as the ultimate dishonor. The Bushido Code emphasized death before capture. Japanese soldiers expected to die rather than surrender, and they expected the same from their enemies. When Allied soldiers did surrender, their captors often viewed them with contempt. The result was systematic brutality. Of approximately 140,000 Allied POWs held by Japan, 27% died in captivity, a death rate 10 times higher than in German camps. The horror began immediately. After the fall of Bataan in the Philippines in April 1942, over 75,000 American and Filipino prisoners were forced on a brutal 65-mile march. Thousands died along the way, shot, bayonet, or left to die from exhaustion and disease. For those who survived the initial shock of capture, the true test began: the grinding daily struggle for survival. In camps across Europe and Asia, prisoners developed routines, systems, and small acts of resistance that kept them human. Food was the primary obsession. In German camps, Red Cross parcels were a lifeline. These packages, sent from neutral countries, contained canned meat, chocolate, cigarettes, and other supplies. Prisoners hoarded them, traded them, and dreamed about them. We'd get maybe one Red Cross parcel per week if we were lucky. You'd save the chocolate bar for days, nibbling tiny pieces to make it last. Some guys couldn't wait. They'd eat everything in one sitting and then have nothing. That's when you saw who had the discipline to survive long term. To combat boredom and despair, prisoners created entire societies within the wire. They formed orchestras, theater groups, and educational classes. In Stalag Luft 3, officers taught everything from foreign languages to engineering. Some prisoners even earned university degrees through correspondence courses. And they planned escapes. The most famous was The Great Escape from Stalag Luft III in March 1944. Over 600 prisoners worked for months to dig 3 tunnels: Tom, Dick, and Harry. They built an underground workshop, created forged documents, and made civilian clothes from scraps. On the night of March 24, 76 men escaped through Tunnel Harry. But only 3 made it to freedom. The Gestapo recaptured the others. Hitler was furious and ordered all 76 executed. His officers negotiated him down, but 50 were still murdered, their bodies dumped along German roads as a warning. In Japanese camps, survival was even more precarious. Prisoners were routinely used as slave labor on massive construction projects. The most notorious was the Burma-Thailand Railway, 258 miles of track carved through mountains and jungle. Over 60,000 Allied POWs and 200,000 Asian laborers were forced to work on the railway. They worked in brutal heat, with inadequate food and no medical care. Tropical diseases, malaria, dysentery, cholera, swept through the camps. By the time the railway was completed in October 1943, over 12,000 Allied prisoners had died. The Asian death toll was even higher. Estimates range from 90,000 to 120,000. Every morning we'd count how many died during the night. We'd carry the bodies out and keep working. If you stopped, you died. It was that simple. You just put one foot in front of the other and told yourself you'd make it one more day. Medical care was virtually non-existent. POW doctors performed amputations without anesthesia, treated gangrene with maggots, and watched helplessly as men died from preventable diseases. Yet these doctors became heroes, saving countless lives with nothing but improvisation and sheer determination. As the war dragged on, conditions deteriorated. By 1944, Germany was crumbling. Supply lines collapsed. Even German citizens were starving. For POWs, rations were cut to starvation levels. In the winter of 1945, as Soviet forces advanced from the east, the Germans forced thousands of POWs on death marches westward. Men already weakened by years of captivity were forced to walk hundreds of miles in sub-zero temperatures with almost no food. We marched through snow up to our knees. Guys would just collapse and not get up. The guards would shoot anyone who couldn't keep up. At night we'd sleep in barns or out in the open. I don't know how any of us survived. Yet even in these darkest moments, prisoners found reasons to hope. They shared their last pieces of bread. They carried wounded comrades. They told jokes and sang songs. They refused to let their captors take their humanity. Perhaps nowhere was this resilience more evident than in the universities prisoners created. In camps across Europe, educated officers taught thousands of classes. Men who'd left school at 14 learned calculus. Farmers studied philosophy. It was an act of defiance, a statement that the mind could remain free even when the body was imprisoned. And then, finally, liberation. For prisoners in Europe, it came in the spring of 1945. Soviet, American, and British forces overran the camps. Soldiers hardened by combat wept at what they found. They were skeletons. That's the only way to describe them. Walking skeletons. But when they saw us, they cheered. They cried. They couldn't believe it was real. Some of them had been prisoners for 5 years. In the Pacific, liberation came suddenly and dramatically. On August 6 and 9, 1945, atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15. For POWs in Japanese camps, the news seemed impossible, until Allied aircraft began dropping supplies. Parachutes filled the sky, red, white, and blue. They dropped food, medicine, everything. We just stood there staring. The guards had run away. We were free. After 3.5 years, we were finally free. The war was over, but for many former POWs, the battle was just beginning. They returned home to families who couldn't understand what they'd endured. Many suffered what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares, flashbacks, an inability to adjust to normal life. Yet most found a way forward. They married, raised families, built careers. They bore witness to what they'd experienced, though many waited decades before they could speak of it. Today, few World War II POWs remain alive. But their testimony endures, in books, interviews, and museums around the world. They remind us of both the worst and the best of humanity. The worst, that human beings are capable of such systematic cruelty. That civilized nations can abandon every principle when consumed by ideology and hatred. But also the best, that even in the depths of degradation, the human spirit can endure. That men can maintain their dignity, their compassion, their essential humanity, even when stripped of everything else. The POWs of World War II teach us that hope is not just an emotion, it's a choice. A decision to believe, even in the darkest night, that morning will come. They teach us that we are more than our circumstances, that our captors can imprison our bodies but never our souls. They were captured. They suffered unimaginable horror. But they survived. And in surviving they proved that hope, however fragile, is stronger than any prison wall. In memory of all prisoners of war, who endured the unendurable, and never surrendered their humanity,